All right, welcome back to the channel. So, Telly Atlas explained how the fight is going to go between Terence Crawford. Well, he spelled a little bit of detail on how this fight's going to go, and he said this fight reminds him of Sugar Ray Leonard and Thomas Hearns 2.0 all over again, and he had a lot of high praise for Terence Crawford as well. I'm going to break it down for y'all. Let's talk about it in this video. King Jr. got another video for y'all. Please share that you like and subscribe to the channel, and also share the video to get all your latest boxing news. With that being said, Teddy Atlas has some specific details on how this fight was going to go with Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. Obviously, Teddy Atlas supports Terence Crawford a lot. He says he likes Errol Spence Jr. as well, but he says he's going to go with Terence Crawford because Terence Crawford has that dog in him, and he just has a high ring IQ, and he's very versatile. And I believe he's going to beat Errol Spence that way. And he says that Errol Spence Jr. is a great counterpuncher, great on the inside. So he was spending a little bit more details, but he says he has more reasons on why Terence Crawford is going to win this fight. And I have to disagree with Teddy Atlas. I think the fact of the matter is that I think Errol Spence Jr. is going to win this fight. If you're a Terence Crawford fan, be a Terence Crawford fan. Me, I'm an Errol Spence Jr. fan. So I'm going to break it down just a little bit on why I think Terence Crawford's not going to be able to handle Errol Spence Jr. Number one, Terence Crawford's ability to switch the orthodox to southpaw. That has been neutralized. When Terence Crawford was at 140 pounds, Terence Crawford was more effective in the orthodox stance. More effective than the orthodox stance than southpaw. When he moved up to 147, his orthodox stance is shot, and he uses his defense. And I'm sorry, guys, in my throat acting up. His defense and his ability in a southpaw stance to overcome the outcome of his opponents, right? I felt like that Terence Crawford has lost that ability. Number two, Terence Crawford is a very slow starter. The reason why I say he's a slow starter is you're not going to have time to compute data against a guy like Errol Spence Jr. and, well, we can say Sean Porter for reference, okay? We know that Sean Porter is a pressure fighter. So we're going to go back a few opponents. When he fought Sean Porter, he was getting hit with the same punch over and over and over again. Overhand rights. And Terence Crawford didn't like that. And Terence Crawford, being that dog that he is, he got a few knockdowns and stuff like that. And he was starting to frustrate Sean Porter and wound up coming back. And I don't think that is going to work. When he fought Egis Kavaliakis, when Egis Kavaliakis got on the inside of Terence Crawford was struggling. You know why? Terence Crawford has a 74-inch arm reach. Terence Crawford is not an inside fighter. Terence Crawford is an outside boxer. He's best damage is going to catch you with the looping hook on the outside. And when he fought Kell Brook, this was what that really concerned me with Terence Crawford. He couldn't get out of a way of a jab. I don't know if he couldn't time the jab right. I didn't know what he was doing. He just couldn't avoid a jab alone. You cannot do that against a fighter with Errol Spence Jr. Okay? If Errol Spence Jr. gets on the inside of Terence Crawford is not going to be able to react good with those punches. Terence Crawford shown that he can be on wobbly legs, but he still chose to continue the fight. Now, Terence Crawford, the only way I see Terence Crawford really giving it to Errol Spence, okay, if he fights Errol Spence in southpaw and play in his range game and hit Errol Spence Jr. with enough to keep Errol Spence Jr. off the inside, Terence Crawford can make a long night for Errol Spence Jr. as well. But the ability that Errol Spence Jr. has, well, I'm going to say this before I get into it. Terence Crawford doesn't make adjustments off the fly. Okay, he's not a fast thinker in my opinion. I think his ability to make adjustments is kind of slow. He does have the ability to make adjustments, but Terence Crawford is going to have to be faster than he usually is. You cannot start out slow against an opponent like Errol Spence Jr. Errol Spence Jr., he's going to compute data for the first 3 rounds. If it gets past 5 rounds and you cannot figure Errol Spence Jr. out, he's going to be on you faster than you think. And I don't think Terence Crawford is going to react fast enough. I think Terence Crawford timing is off. I don't know if it has to do with him moving up in weight. I don't know if his ability of age is catching up to him. We know that when you get older, it's really hard to you to kind of focus and stuff like that. I don't know if it's the money that Terence Crawford's making. Who knows? But there's some things with Errol Spence Jr. as well that could present problems for him as well. Like Errol Spence Jr., we've seen it in the Dennis Ugas fight. When Errol Spence Jr. ducks down for punches to avoid any big punches, Errol Spence Jr., he has a tendency to cock back up way too fast, and Dennis Ugas was clipping him. And lucky enough, Errol Spence Jr. has a granite chin. So Terence Crawford can catch Errol Spence Jr. on getting in the inside. Like Errol Spence Jr. would do bob and weave and duck, and he will pop up at the wrong time. Well, I'm gonna say this: when he switched from defense to offense to defense, Errol Spence Jr. timing is kind of off on that, because if I see you ducking and down trying to get on the inside, I'm going to catch you with something, and Dennis Ugas was catches him. That would be Terence Crawford's biggest advantage, but Terence Crawford's going to have to improve on his timing. Now, I will say this. Terence Crawford has a great mid-range game. He does. Anybody that comes on the inside or in that arm reach advantage that Terence Crawford has, yeah, Terence Crawford can get you out. He can hurt you very bad. He stopped his last 8 opponents when they got in that mid-range games, but Terence Crawford cannot have that dog in that mid-range game like that as well. I think he will have some success doing it against Errol Spence, but Errol Spence is going to make adjustments. I think that Errol Spence is going to fix that adjustment where he's going to find a different way to get on the inside that Terence Crawford has going to have no idea on how he's going to neutralize that. I mean, Errol Spence Jr., he has flaws. Terence Crawford has flaws. And this is what makes for the biggest fight in the sport of boxing. I'm going to put it like this. I see Terence Crawford fans saying he's going to catch him with something. Well, if he catch him with something, if he catch Errol Spence Jr. with a big punch, and if Errol Spence Jr. does not feel anything, Terence Crawford's going to be in trouble. Okay, he may have knocked out his last opponents, but he's dealing with a different breed of fighter. This is an A-plus fighter that Terence Crawford is going to be dealing with. Sean Porter was a B-plus, high-level B-plus fighter, okay? Sean Porter was not an A-level fighter. He was basically out the door of his career when he fought him. So I feel like that Teddy Atlas, he does know the sport of boxing. He does go inside, but I think he's absolutely wrong. As much as he watched boxing, Teddy Atlas doesn't see where Terence Crawford's compute data starts out very, very slow. I mean, for people that hasn't watched that Kell Brook fight, go back and watch that Kell Brook fight. Terence Crawford was losing the first 3 rounds. He was losing. He could not make adjustments to the jab. And Errol Spence Jr. has one hell of a jab. And people want to talk about how low his jab rating was, like 8%. That's better than any other body throwing a jab, because a lot of people miss with their jab more than they land. So I think this is a 50-50 fight. I agree with him. It's Tommy Hearns versus Hagler all over again. But I will explain this, right? It's all going to be about who's going to break each other's will in this fight. I personally think that Errol Spence Jr. is going to break Terence Crawford's will because Terence Crawford has been around here making delusional games, doing all this stuff, how he's going to do this, he's going to do that. He's like a light switch. He turns on one time about Errol Spence Jr., then he turns off, then he wants to have a different emotional side. Terence Crawford is a strange dude, okay? He's good as a fighter, but outside his life, this dude's got problems to me. And I feel like that Terence Crawford will is going to be broken by Errol Spence Jr. That's what I feel. If you ride with Terence Crawford, you believe that Terence Crawford is going to knock out Errol Spence Jr. Believe that. I don't believe he beats Errol Spence Jr. I gave you a slightly insight on how this fight's going to go. I have more specific details on why I think Terence Crawford's going to lose this fight. And Teddy Atlas, he's going to break it down more. But Teddy Atlas, he sometimes he'll favor certain fighters and stuff like that. I'll give him credit on that one. But that's my opinion on the whole situation. I feel like that a lot of people is going to underestimate Errol Spence Jr. in this fight. I feel like that Terence Crawford is going to be the one that has the big head in this fight. I think that Terence Crawford's going to be he's going to try to backtrack and say, Errol Spence Jr. might not be right after this car accident or eye injury. And they're going to continue to look at that. If Terence Crawford comes out and says that Errol Spence Jr., we're going to target that eye or we're going to ruin something in him, okay, keep thinking that because you're just boosting the confidence of Errol Spence Jr. But at the end of the day, Teddy Atlas says that Crawford is a dog and he has a versatile ability and he believes, well, he spilled more detail than that, but he believes that Terence Crawford's going to be victorious in this fight. I don't see it that way. Then the last thing I say this, if Errol Spence Jr. gets on the inside of Terence Crawford is going to be in a world of trouble because Terence Crawford thinks that he's going to be that dog, that junkyard dog in him, thinks that he's going to be a better inside fighter than Errol Spence Jr. You must be a fool if you think that you're going to roughhouse Errol Spence Jr. just like you did Sean Porter. It's not going to work. But that's my take on the whole situation. With that being said, guys, it is what it is. Make sure you like, subscribe, and comment. This is your boy King Jr. I'm out of here. Peace.